Woods County GOP is glad to have everyone here. I'm John Fales, the Woods County Republican Chairman. Some housekeeping things. There's food and drinks back there. Out those doors to the right and to the left. There's bathrooms if you need them. Just quietly get up and do it. And then if you have a cell phone, try and turn the ringer off on that if you could. And for that, let's start.
Hang on one second.
Okay.
Try.
All right, thank you, sir. In all GOP meetings in Oklahoma, we start with the Pledge of Allegiance. He's about to get the flag up there. All right. All who can stand. And take your hats off, please. And just recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Gary, can you say a prayer for us?
Yeah, we'll say a little prayer. Dear Lord, we want to thank you for everyone that showed up today and having Mr. Lankford and Cindy here. We hope that in their endeavors all over the state that you look down and protect them. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. America has its back against the wall right now. Like no other time since maybe 1812. The situation is serious. Liberty is at stake. Our biggest enemy is the DC swamp and globalists who have begun put their boot on our throat. Not to mention radical jihad, communist China, Vladimir Putin and his arsenal. Joe Biden's handling of this has been cartoonish and spooky. However, DC globalists have teamed up to systematically take away our freedoms one at a time, seize the COVID emergency to ramp up to do that. NIH is doing species-ending experiments in labs all over the globe, paid for facilitating global invasion on our southern border. Election fraud, perverted our grade school classrooms in some cases, not so bad in Oklahoma, using big tech to silence speech, agencies spying on political opponents like all of us in this room, faking the kidnapping of Michigan Governor Whitmer and getting caught, while too busy to look at Frank James, Hillary Clinton, and many other serious criminals, selling classified weapons technology to Ukraine and China, which just recently been used in the Ukraine theater. Everything is falling apart, but the target is us. We have a shining star and a good Christian man in the Senate who is here today to discuss this situation, how he is going to help fix it and represent Oklahoma in this and in his next term, and maybe take some questions. I would like to introduce to you the junior senator of the great state of Oklahoma, James Lankford.
Really great to see you all. Have a seat. Thank you. Thanks for being here. It's great to be able to see you. I want to introduce first my bride, Cindy, who's right there. We've been married 30 years as 3 weeks from now, so we're going to go ahead and count it 30 from there. So she is a speech language pathologist. She has clients as well. She is here in Oklahoma, and I travel back and forth to DC, and so we're having the opportunity to be able to travel together today. So it's really nice to be able to get time in the truck, get a chance to be able to hang out today. So I'm going to make just a couple of comments, and then I'm going to open this up for questions, and so we can get a chance to talk about whatever issue that you've seen on the news or some of you want to get more detail on. I'd be glad to be able to engage on that. Let me just say thank you for the introduction. It's very kind of you to be able to walk through that to also set the stage on this. But I would remind us on Easter week, none of the issues he said are bigger than God. Okay, we sometimes get caught up into everything's terrible, everything's bad, everything's awful, and we panic at some point. None of them are bigger than God. So I have the philosophy that comes from Nehemiah chapter 1. We pray and we go to work. And let's pray and let's go to work and let's see what God does. And he does what only he can do on this. We have watched him protect our nation for more than 2 centuries, just like the generations in the past. Let's go to work. There are big things to be able to take on. So I'm going to give you a couple of those things to be able to talk about. And then I really do want to be able to talk about whatever issues you're interested in. Let me start with our southern border. It's a big issue right now. We have never had as many people illegally crossing our southern border in the history of our country as we've had in the past year, ever. To give you a point of reference, there have been more people illegally cross our border in the last 14 months than all 4 years combined of the Trump administration. They have opened up our southern border. We had over 2 million people in the past year that crossed our southern border. Just in the last 6 months, we've had people from over 157 countries cross our southern border. And because the border is so open and the whole world knows it, we now have more people crossing our southern border now from outside of Latin America than we have from Latin America. So literally, the whole world knows you can get into the United States by paying the cartels to be able to then cross the border at the southern side and then to be able to get into the country. That's the route to be able to get in. We have got to put a stop on this. The challenge that we have in the congressional side is, in our Constitution, the Congress writes the law, the President executes the law, and the courts actually oversee the laws actually interpreted correctly. My friend Trey Gowdy, we came into Congress together. He used to jokingly say all the time, when I was sworn into Congress, they didn't give me handcuffs. In other words, I don't get to just go down to the border and start arresting people. That's actually the President's job to do this. So what do you do in a case when the President will not execute the law or refuses to partially execute the law? So here's what we're working on. One is shine a spotlight on it. This goes all the way back to last year. Starting last year, the Biden administration wouldn't allow members of the press to be able to get down to the southern border, and the press just dutifully said, okay, fine, we won't go look. I mean, it's just bizarre to me that a free press would just let it all slide. So there's a group of us, myself included, that went down to the southern border, and I did the crazy thing of actually taking my cell phone in to some of these places, and when I got in, I turned my cell phone camera on and started broadcasting live what I was seeing. If the press won't be allowed to go in, I can get in as a U.S. Senator. I got in and I started broadcasting it. We put the first pictures out last year of what was actually happening in the southern border. The results of that, within a week, the press started asking to be able to go down. They started actually engaging to be able to show it. And you remember a time from about March until June of last year, the press was at the border all the time. Now, since then, they just lost their attention. They're focused on whatever random other thing. But I would tell you the issue at the border is still the same. So I go down to the border often to be able to help demonstrate back to Oklahomans and what's actually happening at the border. I also stay very engaged in the Border Patrol staff and their leadership. It's why the Border Patrol Union actually, in what's called the Border Patrol Council, they actually endorsed me for this race in the Senate again, saying that's the guy that we want to have actually engaging on our issues because I stay engaged with him and can track it. Let me give you a for instance on that. There is at our southern border right now a set of counter what's called counter UAS, unmanned aerial systems. And you'll hear just the term CUAS that are up there. These trucks will actually engage with high-end unmanned aerial systems that the cartels own. To give you a perspective, we had just in the first 2 months of this year, the cartels came over our border 10,000 times with drones. 10,000. They're delivering drugs, where in the past they would just send a person over. Now they can load drugs up onto a drone, fly a drone over, land in the United States. Somebody will pick it up there and then they'll fly it back over. Or they'll take their drone over and they'll actually park it over the border. They'll watch where the Border Patrol is and they can see where they're not, and then they'll move people across the border illegally. If they're putting people in a family unit, they're not worried about those folks because Biden's going to just release them into the country. So they'll take family units and they'll send them one direction, and the Border Patrol will all have to come in to be able to take care of processing those individuals. Once they've got their drone up and they can see the Border Patrol has moved to that group, then they'll put criminal aliens across another part of the river and to be able to get them in. It's a slick operation. The Border Patrol will tell you the border is secure. It's just secure on the south side. You don't get into the country without paying the cartels. And the fee for the cartels is between $4,000 and $30,000, depending on the country that you come from. If you're coming from Honduras, you got no other criminal record, it's about $4,000 to be able to come into the country. You'll pay the cartels. If you're coming from China, or if you're coming in and you've got a criminal record in the United States and it's going to be more trouble to get you in, it'll be $30,000. to be able to come into the country. Last year, best estimate that I have is the illegal trafficking into the country paid to the Mexican cartels $10 billion. $10 billion into the cartels. So when they keep talking about this illegal immigration is no big deal on it, oh, it is a big deal. It's facilitating lots of human trafficking into our country. It's feeding the cartels $10 billion and actually moving people into our country. And that UAS system that I was talking about that's tracking a lot of this, we have a counter UAS system on the ground in that area that the Secretary of DHS has never allowed to be turned on. I discovered that when I was down last time, when I was talking to the Border Patrol, and their statement was, we have an ability to be able to take these drones out that are doing surveillance and delivering drugs. So I went back in, met with the Secretary of DHS, who told me no, FAA hasn't signed off on it. So I go to FAA and get with them to be able to find out. They've actually processed everything and they've sent it over to DHS. So I go back over to DHS and I've now met with him 3 times. And we're going to continue to be able to press until they actually put that counter UAS system in place that's actually there. I'm the only office working on this issue because I actually tracked it, found out it was a problem, and we're going to keep pushing on this until we actually get that done. 2 weeks, well actually it's been almost 2 months ago now, I started focusing on something called Title 42. Now some folks have heard about this. Let me give you a little bit about it because this is like Washington gobbledygook speak. Title 42 is the section of our law that deals with pandemics. It's been in the law a very long time. It gives the executive branch some authority to make some decisions different if we're under some health crisis. President Trump actually put Title 42 into effect, called it up into effect in March of 2020. That's the authority that he used, for instance, to stop planes from coming from China and bringing people in March of 2020. But he also used it to be able to stop people crossing our southern border. It's also being used in places like telemedicine. We started using telemedicine a lot more during the pandemic time period because of Title 42 authority. So it gives them a lot of authority in a lot of different places. So all those things President Trump put into place in March of 2020. When President Biden came in, he kept most of those areas, but he started dropping off selectively parts of it. One of them was at the border. When he first came into office, he said for Title 42, it will apply if you're an adult traveling by yourself, but if you're traveling with a child, it doesn't apply to you anymore. That's how the border was shut down in 2020, but in 2021, 900,000 people were allowed to come into the country illegally. 900,000. The other 1.1 million, they turned away based on Title 42, saying you can't come in because of the pandemic. Now President Biden is now saying he wants to end Title 42 at the border, but keep it in place for everything else. So basically, everyone that crosses the border gets in at that point. Everyone. So I started pushing on this 2 months ago because I could kind of see the trend in what was happening with the administration. So I started going to the floor of the Senate, started speaking out on this, started talking with the Secretary of DHS about it, challenging all these issues, talked to the Secretary of Health and Human Services about it, doing all that push on it. The work that I've done for the past several months, I've actually won over, shocking as this may seem, 5 Senate Democrats in the process. And I've had 5 Senate Democrats join me in this because I've sat down with them individually and said, you know the chaos of the border, it's about to get twice as bad. Are you prepared to defend the president with that? And I've found 5 Senate Democrats that have been willing to say, no, I can't defend the president anymore on what he's doing at the border. We then, unbeknownst to the White House on this and to Chuck Schumer, dropped a bill that I wrote from my office with those 5 Democrats, dropped it out there with a commitment from them that they won't move on any other bill related to COVID until we keep the border closed. So in other words, you can't lift parts of Title 42 and then keep other parts in place. For instance, if you're going to travel on an airplane next week, the mask mandate was supposed to go away on airplanes, except they extended it again because of COVID. So at the same time they're saying COVID is still present in airplanes, they're also saying, but it's not present in our southern border. That's ridiculous. So with the work behind the scenes on this, I'm still pressing on this issue and have been able to win some other folks over because even they can't defend Biden in this policy anymore. Listen, if you're a Democrat, the last thing you want to do is to say, I'm a Democrat like Biden. His approval ratings are in the 30s at this point. There's never been a president at this point in his presidency has had approval rating's as low as him. He is making Jimmy Carter really excited, okay? Because it's now, Jimmy Carter doesn't look so bad anymore. So it's a whole different set of issues we're dealing with. So on the border, we're pushing it everywhere that we can, paying attention to it. I'm glad to answer some more questions if you're interested in that kind of thing as well, be able to deal with it. Let me give you one other thing that's current on this. President Biden, in the last week, has announced that there's a crime wave happening in America. I was like, well, welcome to the party, okay? All of us have seen this for a long time and what's ongoing. They've talked about defund the police. They've talked about all these things for all this time. We've got all these liberal district attorneys that are scattered around in these big cities that have stopped enforcing the law in many of these cities. And we're seeing crime rise. Remember years ago, Rudy Giuliani talked about the broken windows theory? That if you allow a broken window to be able to be there, just more graffiti follows, more destruction follows. But if you fix the broken window, then it actually gets better. How many of you have been to Falls Creek before? Everybody's been to Falls Creek? I used to direct Falls Creek camp. Let me give you an example of this. If you've been to Falls Creek before years ago, you went to Falls Creek in the old wooden benches, which my wife and I affectionately call the Chinese torture benches. That wooden bench structure was the same, by the way, same wooden bench structure since 1917. It kept the same structure on it. But those old wooden benches that were there, everybody would write on them. Everybody put their name on them, and if you talk to the old timers, they would all tell you, no, I never wrote on them, and then you get a quiet, and they're like, yeah, I actually did. I just wrote my girlfriend's name on it. We're not married, but that bench is still out there. And so all the people would write on the benches back in Falls Creek. It was a long-standing tradition, had gone on for decades and decades. When we built the new tabernacle, I was the director there during that time period. I had so many folks that came to me during that time period and said, you're going to build this new tabernacle, and all the kids are going to ride all over the furniture again. That's expensive stuff. The new furniture is really nice stuff. And I smiled at them and I said, no, they won't. They ride on the benches because the benches are written on. But when it's new, if no one's written on it, these kids are not going to write on it. And people go, yeah, right, yeah, right, yeah, right. Well, guess what? Go to the new tabernacle. It's now been there 12 years. And see, there's no writing on it. And if somebody does write on it, it's cleaned off. And so if you stop it early, it doesn't keep going. It works the same way in crime, by the way. It's not a big shocking thing. If you don't stop crime early, it just keeps advancing. And for whatever reason, Biden administration and these liberal DAs can't seem to sink into that fact. You've got to stop petty crime early or it continues to advance and get worse and worse. The Biden administration this past week announced their new initiative to deal with crime in America. You know what their two initiatives are? Pistol braces and ghost guns. That's their new initiative. Pistol braces and ghost guns. Has anyone heard of pistol braces and ghost guns before last week? It's on the news all over the place at this point, but it made me laugh when he announced it. I was like, that is so far from the solution to crime. A pistol brace, if you've never seen it, is an accessory that would help you in your aim, that you can actually, it clamps onto your arm, and so you can get a chance to be able to hold a rifle or a pistol if you have that extension on it to be able to help improve your aim. I don't see a lot of criminal footage of people using a pistol brace, right? It's an aiming device. Most people don't like them, quite frankly. I don't like the way they feel and the way that it works. But other people do on it, great. But that's not the source of all crime in America. But he's suddenly announcing, I'm clamping down on crime by trying to get rid of pistol braces on it. That's absurd. The second piece is the ghost gun, which sounds super scary. I mean, who wouldn't be scared of a ghost gun? Except the Ghostbusters. I would assume they use ghost guns. Ghostbusters. A ghost gun, all it is a kit. Some people like to assemble their own firearms, and it's a hobby thing for them, so they buy the kits and they put it all together, but there's not a serial number when you do that. And so they're making a big deal about it, saying, oh, there's no serial number, which means you can't trace it. If you can't trace it, clearly that's a gun designed to do crime with. No, it's not. It's ridiculous. For any of you who've bought firearms before, you know that there's an initial serial number on it, but I have a Ruger LC9. It's my favorite pistol, okay? If I were to sell that to you, which I wouldn't, but if I were to sell that to you, you could own it, and then you could sell it to her, and then she could sell it to her, and she could sell it to him, and he could sell it to her. There's no tracking on any of that. Even though it has a serial number on it, it's only the initial purchase that actually tracks where it comes from. You have no idea where it moves, so a serial number on a firearm doesn't mean you have a chain of ownership of where it actually went. You can sell a pistol like you sell a piece of furniture. So making this big deal about we have some firearms that are out there that don't have serial number on it is just irrational, saying that that's a source of crime. Plus, the simple fact, if you're not legal to own a firearm, you also can't own a ghost gun. So they're trying to make it sound like this is a secret way to be able to get firearms. That's not true. If you're not legal to own a firearm because you've committed a felony, you can't. By the way, if you committed a felony, I need to check before I say my rumor. No? Good? Okay. So if you can't own a firearm, you can't own a ghost gun either. So again, he's making this big issue about we're going to solve crime by taking on pistol braces and ghost guns, when it actually doesn't deal with the root causes of it. That's my frustration of what's actually going on. So we're pushing back on that. I've got, Ted Cruz and I actually dropped what's called a Congressional Review Act. It deals with the issue of trying to challenge this whole thing on ghost guns to be able to say you're putting in a regulation that's not only not necessary, but it doesn't solve the problem, and you're actually just trying to make criminals of law-abiding citizens. And I put in a separate piece of legislation on the pistol brace thing to say it's a pistol brace. A lot of them are going to ARs and AR-type devices. If for any of you that own an AR rifle, they're called the Barbie gun, the Barbie of guns, because you accessorize them. Okay, you change all the different pieces on it. Some people like to have that pistol brace on it, but it doesn't change anything about the function of it. So we're continuing to be able to challenge this basic piece on it. Okay, I've given you two things that are in the news right now, but I'm sure you're thinking about other stuff that's in the news. So I'd be really interested in what you want to be able to talk about, either what's happening locally or stuff that you've seen nationally or whatever it may be. So ready, set, go. Who wants to ask a question? Yes, sir.
You said that with all these people crossing the border, they're having to pay the cartels between $4,000 and $30,000 to get across.
Yes, sir.
And $10 billion
Billion.
total. Where's that money coming from?
Yeah.
Do these people have that kind of money?
So great question, by the way. Yes and no, if I can answer it that way simple. Let me follow it up. When I talk to the leaders in Central America, where a significant group of the folks are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, when I talk to them, they are furious about the Biden policies because they're saying what Biden is doing by opening up the border is encouraging their middle class to leave Honduras or Guatemala, come to the United States where they can make more money. He said what that's doing is that's killing our workforce here because some of our best workers, and as his statement was, it's not the poorest of the poor because they can't afford to pay the cartels. It's the middle class that can actually afford it, but their middle class can make a whole lot more money coming here to be able to work, but they lose all those workers there. So while Biden's talking about we got to deal with the root causes of migration and let's go help Central America improve its economy, the leaders in Central America are saying you're actually making our economy worse by taking our best workers. That's one group. Second group are the folks that are in abject poverty and they can't afford anything, and so they've got to pay the cartels in work. So that means when they cross the border, they're going to work in their sweatshops, or they're going to work dealing drugs, or do the work for the cartel, or if they're the women, they get trapped into prostitution. Many of these folks that are crossing the border that are in abject poverty are paying off their debt to the cartel, where they'll say, you can't pay us enough, you'll pay us a certain amount, and then the rest of it you're going to have to work off working for us somewhere in the country, and they'll assign them. Again, that's the unspoken piece the Biden administration never wants to talk about. Yeah. What else? Yes, sir.
Okay, for the inflation, like,
Yep.
inflation's so bad right now, gas prices and stuff like that, is there anything like that's trying to go through that you guys are trying to do to fix the inflation part of it?
I've heard that's all Putin's fault.
But another question, if I may.
No, sure. I'll definitely answer that one, but give me your other question.
As I'm sure there's farmers out here and stuff, like our pastures and stuff, we need to fertilize them.
Yeah.
And fertilizer, we already know is going to spike.
Yeah.
So to help the farmers, especially out here, what's going to happen?
Yeah. Just shoot great questions. So in inflation, you can go back and count the month when the inflation started. It started in March and April of 2021. And it's no big shock on this. When Democrats put in a $2 trillion spending bill, when the economy was recovering from COVID and everything was opening back up again and everything's getting started, they did this $2 trillion spending bill that was last year in March. I would tell you, we were loud and engaged to say, don't do this, it's going to cause inflation. And it's not because I'm some prophet that I can see the future. It's pretty evident that if you discourage people from work and you tell people they can make more money at home than they do at work, people will stay home. If you do that, factories slow down in production and production slows down. If that happens, those places have to pay people more to be able to actually come back to work, which causes inflation to rise. So you have slower production, higher cost of production, you have supply chain issues that come right behind it. It wasn't hard to be able to see. In fact, President Obama's economist that worked in his White House did a public statement in the Washington Post to President Biden's team saying, don't pass this bill. It's going to cause major inflation. So even President Obama's economist was telling President Biden's economist, don't do this. They did it anyway, and it caused this massive spike in inflation. The hardest part about inflation is it's hard to stop once it gets started because it feeds itself. For any of y'all that lived during the Carter administration, we remember what that was like during that time period when inflation just fed inflation. The way that it stopped was actually raising interest rates. When you raise interest rates, you decrease buying at that point long term, but it also crushes the economy to be able to do it, to try to slow it down. I talked to a realtor this past week in Oklahoma, and I said, hey, is home buying slowed down? And she said, no, it hasn't slowed down, even though the interest rates are now double what they were a year ago. And I said, well, the problem with that is, if it hasn't slowed down now, they're going to keep raising interest rates until it does slow down, to try to knock off the top off inflation and try to get it turned back around again. That's bad for all of us. It's bad for all of us. So that $2 trillion bill that they did last year, we're still suffering the consequences for, and will for a while. You go back to when Ronald Reagan changed the policy direction in the 1980s from the Carter administration and got inflation down. Inflation has stayed down to the Reagan level for the last 40 years. It's been flat. We've had almost no inflation in 40 years until now. And the big shift was the Biden policy change, and that is especially we feel it in fuel and food, all the basic commodities, anything that has to come on a truck to you, you feel it right away because of all the increased transportation costs on it. The price of gasoline and diesel went up over $1 from the beginning of Biden's administration until the war in Ukraine actually started. So they keep trying to blame it all on Putin. I was like, no, all of us know it. We all feel it. And even the inflation rate of 8.5% that we have now, it was 7.9% the month before. So they're trying to say this is all because of the war. I was like, no, this is the same rise at the same level that we've seen for the last year. Now, it's still continuing to rise, and we don't know where the top of that is. We can't get a good read on that. So what do you do on it? For fuel prices, here's the obvious thing on it. If you want to decrease price, what do you need to do? Increase supply, right? I mean, it's basic economics. If you want a price to go down on something, increase the quantity of it. If you get more quantity of it, the price goes down on it. Biden currently is trying to bring the price down on energy by doing everything but increasing supply. So 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago now, he announced we're going to do a release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We've got this amount of oil reserved in case there's a war, and we're going to release a third of that to try to bring the price down. The problem is that doesn't increase supply long term. It's a short-term fix. But he's trying to disincentivize more drilling by releasing part of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's not going to work. That may have some impact for a couple of weeks. It's not going to work long term because you got to increase long-term supply. The thing he did this week was, did you hear him announce and say, we're going to produce more ethanol. And if we produce more ethanol, that's going to bring the price down 10%. What you didn't see was the little asterisk at that bring the price down 10 cents. It is in certain areas of the country that sell E15. It'll bring the price down. We're not one of those, by the way. And if you burn more corn and turn it into fuel, what happens to the price of feed? Feed goes up, which means meat goes up. The cost of production of all your beef and pork and chicken, everything else goes up as well. So he's trying to tamp down the price of fuel by increasing the price for our food. Okay? That doesn't work. Okay? We have to eat as well as drive our trucks. And so it's just bizarre to me. The simple solution on this is increase production of oil and gas. If you increase production of oil and gas, price goes down. Even last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess now, when Biden announced and said, I want to do more production out there, I want to see companies produce more, that very same week, he announced 15 new taxes that he wanted to put on oil and gas production. So at the same time he's saying y'all should produce more, he's also saying, but when you do, I've got 15 new taxes that I want to be able to put on you. It's just not rational. So the basics of this is the Biden administration has got to stop being afraid of oil and gas. We've got to produce more, and they've got to allow production on federal lands, which is a lot of offshore stuff right now. 24% of the oil that we use comes from our federal lands. We've got to allow production on federal lands again. We've got to not punish pipelines coming in. We've got to allow things like Keystone Pipeline, so we get from Canada. The Keystone Pipeline, why that's such a big deal, that's the exact amount that we buy from Russia. So when he announced last year, we're not going to buy from Canada, what you didn't hear him say was, but we are going to buy from Russia. Okay, it's the same amount. We can either buy it from Canada or buy it from Russia. How many of you would pick between Canada and Russia? Canada, it's your hand. How many of you would pick Russia? Okay, I'm in the same spot you are. We've had a pretty good relationship with Canada since 1812, okay? That whole War of 1812 thing between us and Canada was a little bumpy, but since that time period, we've gotten along with Canada pretty well. I'd much rather buy that type of oil because it's heavy crude. That's what we get from Russia. I'd much rather buy that heavy crude from Canada than I would from Russia. But that was Biden's decision last year. No, let's buy it from Russia, not from Canada, and we're all suffering the consequences. So that's a long answer, but it's a really important issue. It also affects fertilizer because the primary feedstock in fertilizer is natural gas. So if it makes it more expensive to do natural gas, it makes it more expensive to be able to actually produce fertilizer, and we see the cost go up dramatically. Our other challenge right now is Ukraine related, because a bunch of our fertilizer that comes in from Russia. It just does. They've been a long-term producer of fertilizer. So we are seeing some price increases because of this war in Ukraine, in steel, because 70% of the pig iron that we get comes from Ukraine. So that's a big deal. We're having a problem on doing some of our production right now that's recent and will be for a while because the downhole pipe that we use in a lot of our drilling comes from Ukraine. Well, that's a problem right now. Ukraine's got another project they're working on rather than producing downhole pipe. So that's going to be an issue for us. There's also a lot of wheat and corn coming out of that area, which is going to cause our commodity prices to go up when we're selling, but it's also going to be a big issue for the rest of the world trying to get it. So it's a great question, though. Sorry it took so long to be able to answer it. Yes, sir?
Yeah. The IRS still has millions of paper documents out there that are not processed.
Yep.
And they have suspended, but their computer system keeps kicking out notices. Now, they have suspended some of those notices,
Yes, sir.
but not all, like the CP 2000, and they have not addressed the problem of interest and penalties that they are still assessing for these paper documents that they've not processed. Can you kind of update us as to where the Senate is and where, with the IRS and getting that problem resolved?
How many people understood the CPA when you asked that question? Okay. Great. I got 4 of us total. Let me answer it. I met with the commissioner of the IRS last week, asked him that exact same issue. We talked about it. We also met a month before, talking about that same issue. He assures me he's going to set aside all these interest and penalties. He's fully aware he's got 6 million documents that's sitting in reserve that they've not processed yet from 2 years ago, plus what's actually coming in now. So they know they're way behind. We gave them authority to hire more people, 10,000 people. More, and gave them the expedited ability to be able to do it. They started that hiring and have been able to start catching up on some of it, but they understand what's actually going on. We've made it really, really clear. We've asked them to put some documents out to give everyone assurances. Here's what we're going to actually set aside and what we're not going to do. We've got a specific piece. Catch me on it afterwards, and I'll go contact them again and find out exactly where that is.
Have they provided a timeline of when they're going to start suspending those?
They've all said within the next month, but let's check it for the specific document on that one.
Because I know the AICPA was before the Senate Finance Committee in March with the same issues, and we still haven't got any relief yet.
Yeah, I'm on that committee. Yeah, I was a part of that hearing. Yep. It's a great question though. But make sure you catch me later so we get exact on it. Okay. Yes, sir.
What's the feeling in DC about getting fast broadband out here in the country?
Yeah, that's actually really, that's a big, go ahead. Were you about to say something else on that?
No.
Okay, great. Look, I cut you off on that. That's a big issue for us right now. A lot of the money, even the COVID-related money that came out 2 years ago that we did in the CARES Act money, was to accelerate broadband deployment across the country. I think during the time of COVID, everybody kind of woke up and said, yeah, our cell phones work most of the time, but when you get 3 people working at home or 2 people working at home, or you're trying to run the farm and ranch plus trying to also zoom into something, everything shuts down when everybody in the neighborhood does it. So yeah, there's been a pretty aggressive push. Here's my concern on this. Because there's such an aggressive push and we put billions of dollars out recently, it's going to cause the price of fiber optics, the price of materials, the price of insulation to go up dramatically. I talked to a company 2 months ago, and that is starting up a fiber optic company that's going to lay cable as well. He said, I'd love to start it up. He said, except I can't buy the equipment to actually lay the line anywhere in the country because it just sold out immediately because there's so many contracts that are going on. So it's going to take a little bit of time on that, but the dollars have been allocated to it to be able to get it done. But that's a really big issue. There's also 2 satellite companies that are accelerating. I know the satellite internet has been really expensive and not necessarily reliable. It's been with the latency. They talk about just the up and down on it. There's 2 new companies that are actually changing, and the HughesNet folks have actually just revamped some of their technology in part of southeast Oklahoma, and they're starting to be able to spread it around the state as well to change the speed for them. So there are some additional access points coming.
Are you going to support the satellites along with the fiber optic?
Yeah, both of them need to be there. There's some places side by side on it. Let me give you a funny conversation. A couple years ago, I was up in the Panhandle, and we're talking through fiber and their status of fiber in the Panhandle. And I'm looking at the map with them, and we're talking through different aspects in their office. And I pointed to a dot on the map that was red, and it was a different color than the rest of the dots. And I said, well, why is this dot red? And they smiled at me and said, well, that's the last house we're going to get to. Said that house right there will cost $10 million to get fiber to that house. So that's the last one we're going to get to. And I laughed and I said, how long is that going to take to get to it? And they said, I don't know. It's going to be a while. For that house, satellite's going to be a better option. They can't wait for a decade or how long it's going to take to be able to get to that house and that place. There will be spots around Oklahoma that are so far away from the main hub of the fiber that it's not right for them to be able to wait 10 years for the fiber to finally get to them. They've got to have a secondary option to get to them faster. So I think it's a blend of both satellite and fiber. Fiber's going to be more reliable, faster. You're going to get faster upload, download speeds on that, but you just can't wait.
Yeah, time for one more question.
We're running out of time. Yes, sir.
Corruption in the agencies like the FBI, NIH, CIA, stuff like that. And I don't think that's all Biden because it's happened before him, but there's a lot of, it's like a 2-tiered justice system that we've been seeing in the news lately. What's your position, or what should we do with it?
What do we do with it?
Yeah.
That's the bigger issue
Yeah.
on it. So let me say a couple things on it. One is, it's hard to believe this in some ways. When you deal with some of the areas, we have less corruption in some areas because we have more transparency. The more we can shine a light on it, the more that it actually causes other people to go straight, if I can say it that way as well. The joke in DC is sunshine is the best disinfectant. So the more sunshine you can get into that, it helps. But that also means when you find it and see it and expose it, then everybody can look at it and go, okay, what are we going to do to fix that? So I would say on the optimistic side, there are some things getting better. We are getting better at this. The frustration is when we see areas that are not addressed yet. Let me give you a big for instance. What the FBI did around the Trump administration time period, the transition in 2016 and 2017. What James Comey did, Peter Strzok, I mean, you go through the whole list of folks that you saw there during that time period. We want people fired and prosecuted. And it's not just vindictive on this, on what they were doing to President Trump. When I talk to FBI agents, and I meet with our FBI agents here, and I've got friends that are FBI agents, when I interact with those folks, they're embarrassed for what HQ did. And they say they're defaming a good organization. We're busting it, trying to do the right thing, and we've got those guys violating all the rules that they give to us. They're just as eager to get those folks busted out as everybody else did. to say, if, for instance, one of the guys said to me, if I took an FBI document home and kept it, I'd be fired. James Comey did. Not just one, a bunch of them, and not only just took his notes home, but then gave them to a friend of his to get them out of his hands. He said, I'd be so fired for that and prosecuted for taking a document that was a White House sensitive document out to my house and then hand it to somebody else. He said, that is not in protocol. That's just the most basic of things. So what we're doing on this, the Durham investigation is still ongoing in this. I have no idea why it's taken so long. It's taken forever. It's an independent counsel that was set up during the time of the Trump administration to be able to look at this. When the transition happened last year, myself and several other senators immediately contacted the Department of Justice and said, we're watching. Do not shut off the funding for the Durham investigation. Because we thought quietly they were going to just start bleeding their money out and to say, yeah, you're still operable, but you won't have any cash to be able to hire the investigators that you need to finish it. So we've been tracking that funding. Then we continue to be able to follow up with them. We just did another letter back to them about a month and a half ago when some of the initial things came out from the Durham investigation that they're doing, showing some of the corruption that's happening. We did another contact back to the Department of Justice to say, we're tracking all of this. We want you to know we're still watching the funding, we're still engaged, let it finish its work. Now, we don't know how long it's going to take. Some of the independent investigations take years, some take months. This one's taken years. But that tells me they're doing their work, let them do their work to be able to finish it. It's the same thing that we do with Department of Justice. Each week, my staff is actually engaging with their staff, tracking what's going on the election integrity issues. We do it every single week to be able to track through the issues, making sure we're tracking what's going on in states and what's going on in the Department of Justice to be able to track through these things. So, again, I go back to sunshine being a good disinfectant. The more people know we're watching it, the more individuals will go, okay, somebody's paying attention to this, and so we're going to try to be able to figure out a way to be able to make sure we can fill all of our forms and be able to do it right. I know we got to go. I want to hang around for a couple of minutes in case you've got individual questions. Not everybody likes to ask questions out loud in front of everybody, and I want to be respectful of that, so if you don't mind, I want to block off a couple of minutes to be able to make sure I can hang around for a couple minutes in case you've got an individual question. Can I just say this to you, though? Thank you for showing up and being here and staying engaged. As Cindy and I travel around the state, we run into people all the time that they're mad or discouraged and they just check out. They just check out. They just say, I'm not going to pay attention to any of this stuff anymore. I'm not watching the news. I'm not tracking social media. Come on. So all of that makes people actually be less engaged in the issues. So when people show up and they're actually engaged, it reminds me again that America's still out there. I have folks that catch me all the time and say, the whole world's gone crazy. Can I just tell you something fun? The last polling that was done, when they asked this question, is America on the right track or the wrong track? It's been a question asked for a long time, decades and decades. Pollsters will just ask this simple question, is America on the right track, wrong track? Recent polling, 72% of the people in the country said we're on the wrong track. 72%. So if you get into this feeling, has the whole world gone crazy? I would tell you, based on polling, only 28% of the world's gone crazy. Okay? That's the group that's saying, no, we're on the right track. I can't imagine that group right there that's going, yeah, this all looks good, this all looks right. But that also tells me 72% of the country has the same feeling that we do. That says, we're on the wrong direction. This is not the way it should be. That means more people are waking up and saying, what do we do to fix it? To go back to your original statement. How do you actually fix this? So, because for me, just yelling about something doesn't fix it. You got to fix it to fix it. And I have an awful lot of people that want to just yell about the problem. I'm like, okay, do you feel better? Now I got to fix it, okay? That doesn't solve anything. My staff, I tell them all the time, when everybody gets together at the coffee shop and gripes about the issues, they can gripe about the issues. But if you're there in the conversation, they're not griping about the issues anymore. They're saying to you, how do we fix this? That's a fair question to be able to lay out there. And so for my team, we focus on the areas, whether it's veterans issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's what we're going to do on all the crazy COVID mandates and trying to be able to knock those down, whatever it may be, we're focused on those issues. I stay engaged with the Department of Justice on them trying to be able to reach into school board meetings and saying that they're going to go investigate people at school board meetings. That's absurd. Okay, so we engage in those issues But we get a chance to be able to do that because we talk to folks. And they say, this is what I'm worried about, and we go after it. To actually get a chance to be able to work on those. So if you have an idea or a thought or a concern on something, don't hesitate to be able to reach out to our team. Because we want to be able to stay engaged, to be able to actually fix the issues, not just complain about the issues that we're actually addressing. And some of these issues are hard and complicated, and believe me, when you're trying to move Chuck Schumer in the crowd on some of these things, it has its own unique dynamics. But that doesn't mean it's impossible, and it doesn't mean it's bigger than God. So we go to work on those things. I would be remiss, bless you, by the way. I would be remiss if I didn't also say this before we close up. There is an election the 28th of June. I'd be honored to be able to have your vote in that election. I'm a person that doesn't treat elections like Mortal Kombat, because I don't think it's Mortal Kombat. It's a job interview. That's all it is. It's a job interview. And I'm traveling all over the state, and I'm talking to great folks like us. And I'm just saying, here's who I am, here's what I believe, here's my commitment to honor God and my family and my state in the way that I do the work that I do, and what I choose to be able to work on, and how I choose to be able to do it. And I'd be honored to be able to have your trust to be able to be rehired for this job again when it comes up.